Hi guys, Tom Barclay here, just outside Tottenham Hotspur Stadium after the 1-1 draw against Fulham, which to be honest was pretty disappointing. Ange Postecoglou's 51st Premier League game. I just did a video on his first 50 and how entertaining they were. I don't think it was particularly entertaining, and it was pretty dismal to be honest all round. Maybe that's a bit strong. Dismal's a bit strong, but it wasn't great, and I guess it left a lot of fans frustrated again from the inconsistency of the team this season. Ange talked about that and a frustration from his point of view of people not really taking into account the injuries that are hitting his squads, which I guess is a fair point. But overall, you can understand supporters getting a little bit irked at how you can go and batter Man City one week and then labour to a certain extent to a 1-1 draw here, and on another day they could have lost it. Created chances too, is what Spurs do, so they could have won it too, but I don't think they really did enough to win it overall, and I can sort of understand a few boos at full time, which felt more like frustration over what has been a pretty frustrating season all round, when it's gone from going really well to performances like this, which feel like opportunities missed. But I said before the game, Fulham are a good team, despite the poor performance last week, which Marcus Silva reflected on today, saying it was strange, losing 4-1 at home to Wolves, something that doesn't really normally happen to them. And when they're on their game, they are difficult not to crack. And so they proved for Spurs today. Before we get into sort of talking points about it, just on the game briefly, Spurs had some chances. One of their best chances was for Heung-min in the first 49 seconds, which he was pretty lacked conviction, as Andrew would say, with his strike, where he hit it straight at Bernd Leno and could have done better. It's kind of been a bit of a tricky period for Son, confidence-wise, in front of goal, which we'll come on to later. Then Fulham created quite a few chances. Fraser Forster had a good game, come on to him as well. But after half-time, Spurs actually did take the lead through Brennan Johnson. A great volley from his point of view, from a good Timo Werner cross to put Spurs ahead. And I felt like maybe it was been one of those games which Tottenham haven't had too much of recently, where things have really sort of dropped for them. But Fulham still came back. A good goal from Tom Cairney, who came on for Cesar Lukic in the 62nd minute, scored 5 minutes later, belting finish, of course, could do nothing about, and then was sent off on 83 minutes for a pretty bad foul from his point of view on Kulusevski, which he couldn't really have any arguments about. I don't think, as Silva said afterwards, he's not a malicious type of player. It's not really, classic case of him not being that kind of player, but you couldn't really argue with it, and Silva wasn't arguing with it either when VAR showed him sort of raking his foot down the back of his leg. The referee, Darren Bond, went to his monitor, and it was not surprising to see him give him his marching orders after that. Just the fact that, but after that, Spurs didn't really create a whole lot either, didn't really make the 10-man advantage count, and yeah, it comes back to this sort of recurring theme of Spurs being inconsistent. Ange afterwards, he's not really one to moan, to be honest, and to use injuries as excuses, but kind of was today. And I get his point. He was talking about, first of all, he seemed a bit irked when he came into the press conference about some of the questions he'd been asked in the TV interviews, essentially about how can you produce a performance like this, having played so well, such a euphoric victory over Man City. And I think that had started to get to him a little bit, and he was saying how it's quite sort of quite a recurring theme for Spurs to have these great highs and have them be used against them, have them as be essentially millstones around their neck to criticise the team for later, whether it be that win against Man City and they're not being able to live up to those highs, or that fantastic 10-game unbeaten run that he started his tenure with. It's something he's mentioned a few times, particularly recently. And he feels like the Man City questions are slightly disingenuous in the sense that they're overlooking the injuries they've had since. Obviously, Vicario being the first one, a key player, having the goalkeeper out since then. And then obviously Dominic Solanke, who was missing from this team, not through injury, even though he looked like he had a bit of a groin in the Roma game, but actually through illness. Dominic Solanke actually turned up, reported for duty at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, just behind me, before kick-off, but then was deemed sort of ill, not well enough that he was sent home. So he was obviously without his £65 million star striker. He's obviously without his first choice centre backs in Romero and Van der Ven, who was still injured. And afterwards he talked about the fact that he said that the violins can often, he used this quote about how the violins have been out a lot for teams who've had one centre-back out. Don't know quite who he was referring to there, maybe Liverpool with Konate or Diaz with Man City, but for us we just expected to get on with it. So like I say, having a little bit of a grumble about the lack of context about the injuries that his team have been facing this season. And when you look at the bench, once again, like Roma, they had literally a school kid on the bench and Luca Williams-Barnett, which, nothing against his clearly massive promise that he's showing, but he's not the kind of player he'd be wanting to have on the bench at this stage of or any stage of the season. Someone who, he's only just turned 16, and there weren't really that many options. But he also left Kulusevski on the bench, or starting with him on the bench before bringing him on later. And he had kind of signposted this in the pre-match where we were asking about Kulusevski, and he talked about having to protect him from overburdening him, was the phrase. So I guess it wasn't a huge shock when he was left on the bench, and he doesn't want obviously have him get injured. But I don't know, when Solanke pulled out, maybe on reflection, having such a big hitter like Kulusevski, which what he's become their talisman. It's kind of gone past Son in that way, in terms of him becoming the team's talisman now. To leave him on the bench when he's playing so well, maybe that was a mistake on reflection, but I mean, I'm sure he'd see it differently, and maybe his numbers were in the so-called red zone after so many games recently, and he needed a break. I don't know, but obviously they didn't win the game, and it's all hindsight and everything after that. Obviously it was the foul on him that actually led to the red card from Kearney, but to be honest, when he came on, it wasn't like he made a huge amount of difference anyway, so I don't know, it depends how you debate it really. Looking at the positives, I'd say Fraser Forster. His first Premier League game since playing against Leeds in May 2023. That's 18 months. Only his sixth game in that period since. I thought he was good. Saves-wise, he was good. As we know, he's a solid shot stopper, and he was at it again today. Saves from Diop early in the second half, from a header with his knee. A couple of good saves from Jimenez, one particular volley from Jimenez, which Jimenez didn't really do anything wrong. It was a well-struck volley, but it was a great save from Forster, a strong right hand, and overall he was good. And give another sort of vindication behind not bringing a free transfer goalkeeper, another sort of suggestion that he could be a fitting sort of backup during this period without Vicario. Maybe they can muddle through without. I would say that Ange afterwards was talking about him, and he said, when you've got a player like Vicario, as influential as he is, being out of the team, what you want is someone who's experienced, who won't be overawed by the situation, and that's exactly what they got from Forster. There were still moments on distribution from him where he had one sort of hairy pass where he put Spurs in trouble by misplacing a relatively simple pass out to Basuma, and that is something that just seems to be a common theme, and perhaps throughout this period maybe he won a game at the moment, so that's sort of underlines why maybe overall he's not the most suited to Postecoglou's style of play. But we've talked about that many times, and his experience when it comes to keeping the ball out of the net, I suppose, did come to the fore in this game. I thought Dragozin was pretty solid. I spoke to him after the Roma game for a piece in today's paper, where Fulham, if you remember, was his first Premier League start last season, where he got ripped apart by Rodrigo Muniz in a terrible 3-0 defeat, which very much could have come into the worst defeats of Ange's first 50 Premier League games in that video I did. Check it out if you haven't seen it. But I overlooked that one. That was really bad, that game, and Dragozin in particular looked really shaky and really struggled. But when I spoke to him the other day, he speaks flawless English, by the way, if you hadn't seen any videos with him before, because I know he hasn't spoken too much, but he basically talked how he felt like he'd evolved since then as a player and very much adapted to the Premier League. And you've got to say, I've been one of his biggest critics, I suppose, at times, not wondering how he fits into this particular team. But I thought, again, he's been good recently. As Postecoglou has said, he's been good, and Davis has been good. I thought he was solid again. Good intervention on his line from a Harry Wilson ball across right towards the end, which was pretty critical. He also, one of the things we haven't really seen so much from him is his ability from set pieces, attacking set pieces. And I thought he was a threat today. He had a couple of headers which went close, and I remember when he first signed, my colleague at The Sun, Charlie White, did an interview with, I forget which Italian player who played with him, talking about his heading was like the equivalent of having a third foot. It was that strong, from attacking set pieces. And he was known as the train at Genoa because the way he'd get through, he sort of stormed through sort of defence back lines at set pieces and score goals. Like I say, I haven't seen too much of it, but maybe that was more of a hint of it today. And I thought overall he was good. And then Brennan Johnson, obviously 10 goals in 20 games for Spurs this season. That's 1 and 2. It's not a fluke. Ange talked in the pre-match about how he'd love to be a right-sided forward in his teams, because when you look at his teams at Celtic, Yokohama, Brisbane Roar, all his teams, it's a position where we're going to score a lot of goals. It's not a surprise, from fantasy football point of view, if you get him in your team, because that position gets a lot of chances in an Ange team. But the key is Johnson is now showing the composure to finish him off, and today was a really good finish. I mean, there's one thing tapping in at the far post when pretty much any player could score if they were in that position. This was a really controlled, fine volley from Vernon's good cross that not every player could do, and it just sort of sums up his confidence right now and how reliable he's becoming in finishing off these chances. Negatives wise, I suppose I'll start with Son on that. I mean, sort of the opposite of where Johnson's at the moment, and it's with a heavy heart talking about it really, because he's been such a stalwart for this team, and he's clearly just going through a bit of a rough patch. So I'm not saying he's finished by any stretch, but he missed a big chance against Roma, which would have probably killed off the game. Big chance early doors today. I thought all round he was pretty poor, to be honest. So his touch was pretty heavy. If they'd had a full contingent of players on the bench, I imagine he would have come off relatively early, because he just was struggling. He was playing through the middle, to be fair, which is in Solanke's absence, which just doesn't really seem to suit him too well. So you got a feel for him on that point of view, but it just felt like quite off his game, and it feels like his confidence is a little bit lacking. So I actually asked about Son to Ange in the post-match press conference. I mean, how he sort of helps him get that, sort of restore that confidence. And Ange sort of admitted that he was going through a bit of a tough time, but he said you could say that about a lot of the players at the moment in the attacking third. But he's not the kind of player to let it dwell on him, and I'm sure the goals will come flowing again soon. Which, with looking at Son's record, you've got to presume that's going to be the case. But I'd say overall it's been a tricky season so far for Son. He hasn't really quite hit the heights of yesteryear, and being the age he is, no doubt people will start questioning whether he can still do it. So it's up to him to sort of prove that he can, and I think he can. But today was an off day from his point of view, as it was for James Maddison as well. Obviously such a high, getting back at Man City, back in the team, wanting to sort of create, but a lot of his passes were a little bit wayward, cut out at times. I just didn't think he had quite that creative influence. Having said that, he went so close to scoring what was a really sneaky, clever free kick just before half-time, where he hit it under the wall, caught Fulham out completely, and if it weren't for a deflection, it would have gone in. Unfortunately, the deflection rolled it right, nicking onto the post. It was so close. He looked absolutely gutted when it go in. That was pretty creative and pretty clever from Maddison's point of view, but overall I thought his performance was a little bit ineffective from the man you'd expect to be sort of creating chances, and that kind of sums where he's up this season. He kind of reflects or embodies Tottenham's inconsistency this season. A frustrating performance from his point of view. Just finally talking about injuries going forward, because we've got Bournemouth on Thursday, just this stage of the season where there's just so many games. Solanke he hopes is going to be back. He's obviously just illness, he's not injured. Romero, I wouldn't be so sure based on his comments afterwards. He said he and Van der Ven still aren't training with the team. They're still working with a sports scientist. Now, we thought Van der Ven's going to be back sort of mid-September, so that's not a surprise, but the fact that Romero is still at that point makes you concerned a little bit. Although having said that, the two centre-backs are playing so well at the moment. Ben Davies sporting a bit of a shiner on his face. One of his eyes had a black eye, which apparently caught against Rome, which I hadn't noticed. So maybe that's not as big a loss because of the way they're playing. But once wait to see with Romero. And then Archie Gray came off with a dead leg having gone on. Came off in the final few minutes of injury time. But Ange said it was just a dead leg, so you'd like to think he'd be fit in time. That actually saw Will Lancashire come on for his Premier League debut, which would be somewhat overlooked from this performance, but still a moment to sort of mention, because a landmark moment for him personally. Overall, though, Spurs not at it really today. I don't say they're lucky to draw, but I'm not sure they really did enough to deserve to win, and just kind of continued the theme this season of frustration from supporters' points of view over their inconsistency, and wondering if they ever will really sort of get it together to become sort of where Ange wants to take them. But from his point of view, it was mainly down to injuries, which I don't think is a complete excuse, but is an understandable element that must come into assessing this performance.